In this lesson, we'll talk about two important classes provided by the Foundation framework, NS Dictionary and NS Mutable Dictionary. You'll find the sample application for this lesson in your Working Files directory. Dictionaries are used to manage pairs of keys and values. This key-value pair is called an entry, and each entry must have a unique key within that dictionary. So how do we create a dictionary? Well, just like NS Array, there are a number of creation methods. One approach is to specify the individual keys and values as two separate arrays. In this case, I'm specifying all of the keys for my dictionary, and in a separate NS array, I can specify all of the values. I'll then create a new NS Dictionary instance, passing in those names and keys. Now, if I want to get the individual values back out, I can use NS Dictionary's object for key method. So if I want to get the drummer, I'll ask for the object for key drums. If I want to get the lead guitarist, I'll ask for object for key lead. And I can print these values out to the console. And let me just run this. So we can see drums, we've got Ringo, and lead guitarist, we've got George. Just like an NS array, we oftentimes want to iterate through the values stored in this dictionary. So I can use this for in syntax once again to do that. So I'll say for ID key in Beatles. So this will iterate through all of the keys contained within this dictionary. And then for each iteration through this loop, I'll print out the key and then ask for that particular object for the key. So if I run this, there I've dumped all of the contents of that dictionary out to the console. Now, NS Dictionary, just like NS Array, is an immutable type, meaning that once it's created, its contents can't be changed. But the Foundation framework also provides a mutable version called NS Mutable Dictionary, and this allows me to add and remove the contents of this dictionary. So I'll create a new one, and I'm going to use its dictionary with dictionary method, so I can take my immutable version, pass it into this initializer, and then create a new mutable version of that collection. I can use the set object for key method to add new entries into my dictionary. So in this case, I'm adding Brian Epstein under the manager key and George Martin under the producer key. And I can iterate through this as well. And I'll just print this out to the console. I'll just add a little spacer so you can see this better. So we can see the new manager and producer entries that I've added to this dictionary. Since this is mutable, I can also modify its contents. So if I wanted to remove Brian Epstein from this collection, I can call the remove object for key method, and that will remove that value. So you can see he's now been removed from this dictionary. One thing we haven't talked about yet is what about the cases where we want to insert a nil value, either in a dictionary or an array? For instance, if we're not sure who the sound engineer was on the various Beatles albums, we might want to insert a nil value under this engineer key. But let's see what happens when we run our app now. All kinds of bad things have happened. We can see that it terminated the app due to this uncaught exception NS invalid argument. And specifically, it's telling me I'm attempting to add a nil value into this dictionary. What you'll find is that with both NS Array and NS Dictionary, neither one of them allow you to insert nil values. But of course, there are cases where the value is unknown. So what do? Well, you'll use this class called NSNull, and you call its null method. So anytime you've got a nil value, or essentially the equivalent of a nil value, you would want to specify NSNull instead. So if I run this again, now see it's much happier, and instead of blowing up horribly, it produces this null value when it prints out to the console. What about when I'm retrieving these values out? Specifically, what happens when I'm retrieving an NSNull? Well, I'll declare a variable of type NSString and give it the name engineer. And I'll just set it to nil. And I've got a simple if-else condition here. So if engineer is equal to nil, print out this line, else print out this line. So if we run the app, we'll see that engineer was nil, just like we'd anticipate. But what about when we're retrieving this NSNull value out? So I'm going to say mutable Beatles, object for key, and I'll pass in the key engineer. Now I effectively want to treat that as if it's nil, But if I run this, I'll see that engineer was not nil. So that's not quite the result I want. When we're dealing with NS nulls, you oftentimes need to do an additional test. So if I wanted to treat nil and NS null as being equivalent, I might need to add an OR condition in here, and I'd say engineer is kind of class, NS null class. So this way, if the engineer is nil, or if it's kind of class NS null, I'll treat this as if it were nil. So I'll run this again, and now I can see I'm getting the correct results. It can be important that if your array or dictionary is potentially storing NS null values, you may need to do an additional test to make sure you're handling these values correctly. Dictionaries are used to store key value data and are used frequently throughout the COCO frameworks. We'll be using these classes a lot throughout this course, so you'll be quite familiar with NS Dictionary and NS Mutable Dictionary by the time we're done.